I always say, if you don't know what you're doing, like if you're starting off like me, where you have no idea how whatever product you're trying to sell is made, always start small. Start with a small quantity. Start with, but that's how I brought it to market. Just making that human connection, collaborating with other business owners, selecting strategic partnerships where you're not necessarily direct competitors, but you benefit from each other's audience. And I think there's something powerful to be said about meeting someone in person and hearing their story versus reading it online. I knew that when I started this brand, I wanted to create fair paying jobs for women. So all clothes are made by women in Chicago currently who are paid a fair wage. I pay them up to 4 times the minimum wage, up to $60 an hour. Welcome to the S Factor. My name is Jocelyn Clarkson, and I'm the founder and designer of Swap and Strut and podcast host of Quit Your Job and Get Creative. My success factor is that I lead with my mission.
Hello, Jocelyn. Good morning.
Hi,
How are you today?
how are you? I'm good, Tariq. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. I do appreciate that a lot. And you have a very fascinating story to tell. So we're going to get right into it. But before that, let's start off with your earlier days of growing up, some of the expectations that your parents may have had, your early career. Let's start off with that.
Absolutely. So I was born in Chicago to Guatemalan immigrant parents. So both my parents were born in Guatemala, and they moved to the United States in their 20s. So, they had very limited opportunities growing up in Guatemala. It is a third world country. So growing up, in Chicago, I've always heard the stories about how my parents used to live and all the sacrifices that they made to give my sisters and I a better life. You think about the American dream, and that's what they chased here in the US. So not that my parents, were applying this unrealistic pressure to me, but me internally felt that, you hear these stories, all the sacrifices that they made to give us a better life. And so for me, I felt that I needed to justify those sacrifices. So what that led to was me realizing that when it came time to choose a career, right? Like for me, my first thing was my education was my way to be successful. I felt that I needed to be the best version of myself to justify these sacrifices and make the most amount of money and really just make them proud, but to also be a role model to all my other, family members who still live in Guatemala, who are still in this cycle of poverty. Even in Chicago, we weren't, we were poor. So, I felt that my ability to get out of this cycle of poverty and to really make it, quote unquote, was to get a really successful job. And for some reason, I believe that I needed to either be a doctor, a lawyer, or work in finance, banking somehow. So I've always loved fashion. I've always loved textures and fabrics and color. But for me, that was just a hobby. And to be honest, I never, it didn't occur to me that that could be a job. And even then you hear about the word, you hear the term starving artist. And so when it came time to choose a career path in college, to select a major, I was thinking, okay, well, it's obviously not going to be fashion because I don't want to be a starving artist. I'm not going to, end up with all this opportunity here in the US just to be a starving artist, right? So I decided to go into business and finance, and that was solely based on watching the movie Wall Street with Charlie Sheen. They glamorized this idea of working in finance, working in the stock market, minus, the shady things that they were doing. I was like, this is what I want to do. It's exciting, it's glamorous, and you can make a lot of money. So, I think that's where it starts. It's really having this internal feeling to justify, what my parents went through, all their hardships, make it worth it. But then also putting my passions aside and saying, this isn't a career. This is just a hobby. And at the end of the day, I don't want to be broke my whole life. So that's really how I started my career in business. After that, I went into I studied business in college. I went to DePaul and I really applied myself. I was interning all 4 years of college and even high school and landed a full time job, while I was a senior in college. So I took it very seriously, my career very seriously. And I ended up working as a consultant for one of the big four accounting firms. And I thought in my head, I've made it. So here I was, making a six-figure income at a young age, at the age of like 25, which, it's rare compared to all my other friends. They were not there yet. And so for me, I had all these boxes checked. I lived downtown Chicago in this nice high rise. I had an amazing boyfriend. I had a great career, great family, great friends. But I would say 8 years into my career, I would wake up feeling miserable. And it got to the point where I didn't know why, right? When you think about all the things that I had on paper, they were all there, but I was miserable. And it got to the point where I like realized that it came from what I was doing, that I wasn't following my calling and my passions. And I made the decision at that point during COVID that when my dad passed away, it was a quick reminder that like life is too short. You can't just float through life. You have to take ownership of it. And so when my dad passed away, I made the decision like life's too short. I'm not going to live a life of misery for six figures for what? I don't even have the time to go out and enjoy it because I'm always working. So I made the decision to quit my job and finally pursue my career in fashion.
Okay. Yeah, that was a very difficult time for you, I'm sure, because
So
the pandemic and everything, being locked away, being separated from everyone, your father passing away. So all those things sort of motivated you to sort of quit this corporate lifestyle and go into and pursue your passion, right? So, what are some of the challenges that you faced initially when you made this decision?
the challenge was initially, I had no idea. So I knew I wanted to go into fashion and I've always wanted to, up until that point, I had always imagined like this piece of outfit, this dress, this garment would look so much better if it just had this zipper or X, Y, and Z, if it was made out of this fabric in this color. So I would always imagine, kind of think through what I would create, right? So when I quit my job, I had the decision that I wanted to be a fashion designer, which was aligned with everything that I've done in the past. I'd make my own costumes and all that stuff. But the biggest hurdle was not knowing how to make clothes. I had no idea where to start. I knew how to draw, barely. I mean, my drawings were awful, but I knew how to sketch something and get it on paper. I didn't know how to take that sketch and turn it into a professional product that I could sell. So I didn't go to fashion school. I had the business intel, but I didn't have the fashion intel. And that was really a tough hurdle for me because I spent a lot of time researching and I spent a lot of money making mistakes that had I known or had I had the knowledge or gone to fashion school or just been knowledgeable of the fashion process, I would have saved myself so many thousands of dollars. But for me, I think about every hurdle, every expense as a learning experience. I feel that that's kind of my way of going to fashion school. Like I didn't go to a traditional fashion school, but I still got the education through real life experience. And believe me, when I made these mistakes, I learned from them and I'm not making them again because they cost me thousands of dollars. So it's almost like I went to fashion school in my own way.
Yeah, yeah. That's a very important point that you mentioned, that you know what, mistakes will be made, especially when you're starting out a small business, but at the end of the day, not to repeat those same mistakes. It's the lessons that we learn, right? So, could you give us a step-by-step process on how you got started? Because I think that there are a lot of people who have similar passions, but they
Yeah.
don't have a plan in place on how they can actually execute it. So,
Right.
given that you had worked in a consulting role for one of the big fours for a number of years, obviously you have that analytical mindset and you have a more like a strategic way of looking at things, right? So how did you leverage those skills to come up with a sort of step-by-step process?
Yeah. So one thing I learned, I think in the corporate setting that I applied that allowed me to get started was I'm very proactive, right? In the corporate world, you have to send emails to people you don't know. You have to ask for things. You have to ask questions. And if they don't respond, you have to follow up, follow up, follow up. And if they don't follow up, then you schedule a meeting, then you escalate, etc. Right? So I'm pretty good at like getting things done, being proactive, reaching out to people, and getting what I need. So what I did was, okay, I can draw and I have these drawings. I don't know how to turn them into the next thing. So I went on Google and I just searched fashion design courses in Chicago. And I found this school in Chicago called Hovet Fashion Studio, and they had in person, by the hour courses. And so basically, they have this menu of certain aspects of fashion design that you could learn. The first one was Fashion Design 101, right? And then it was like pattern making, all these other things. And so I thought, let me start with Fashion Design 101. So I made an appointment with the founder, and she had previously made a clothing collection that Jennifer Hudson bought her first clothing collection. So I was like, she's legit. So I ended up going to her studio and had one session with her. And this one session might have cost me like $75. It was worth every single penny because she taught me how to look through inspiration and create like a tangible design out of it, how to create a cohesive collection. From there, I asked her, I was like, well, what's the next step? So she taught me the process of fashion design. And then she said, the next step is to really get a pattern maker to start using these drawings and to start making a pattern, like make a muslin sample prototype. And she said, actually, in the same studio, I have a fashion designer who, started her clothing line. So she connected me with that fashion designer. I sat down with the fashion designer and she connected me to the pattern maker. So I now had a pattern maker reach out to her and said, these are my designs. And so at this point now I have my designs. I have a pattern maker who can take my terrible drawings and create basically prototypes out of muslin fabric. So then the next step is to sample, right? So then you have this prototype and then basically you try it on. So I came in, I tried it on, and with every prototype, there's things that need to be revised. We went through a few rounds of revisions. And once we got the prototype down, then I had to go out and search for fabric. So I just asked the pattern maker, hey, do you know any fabric representatives who sell wholesale fabric to fashion designers? Because you don't want to buy retail fabrics because you're going to be paying triple. She connected me with a fabric rep in Chicago. So I went to her studio, talked to her, found the fabric for this one design, found the trims, found the notions, the zippers, placed the order, waited for that to get shipped to my house, gave it to my pattern maker, who then created a final sample. So at this point, I have a final sample of my first creation. And then from there, once you finalize that final sample, then you move into production. So it turned out that my pattern maker also ran a manufacturing, like a small manufacturing company. So she was able to produce my first run of clothes. But I will say that, for anyone listening who wants to get started with clothing or even, I think, product-based businesses and anything, I always say, if you don't know what you're doing, like if you're starting off like me, where you have no idea how whatever product you're trying to sell is made, always start small. Start with a small quantity. Start with one. Because what I did was I started with a 15-piece collection. And what I realized is that there are certain things that the market wants. There are certain sizes that sell better. There are certain things that people aren't going to wear. And had I just started with one or two pieces, brought that to market, taking the feedback from the customers and applied that to my next collection, I would have saved myself thousands of dollars. So if there's one piece of advice, again, it's start small. start with one item, go through the entire development and production process to understand how the process works. And then from there, you can always add variety. Whatever you're doing, you can make in different colors. You can add simple tweaks and changes here to create a whole new product. So that's really how it started. But I think it's just asking the right questions and making that first step. Had I not taken that course, that fashion design course, I wouldn't have the network that I have today. And so one tip that I also like to give is whoever you meet in your journey, whether it's someone who's helping you in the process, always ask them, hey, is there someone else that can help me with X, Y, and Z? Is there someone else who you know can be a good source of information? Always ask for that, because that's how you build your network. But that's the process. That's how I got started with clothing.
Thank you so much. That was very detailed, and it will help, as you said, not only fashion, but any sort of product based entrepreneur who's looking to start something. Perfect. So now you have the inventory. How do you go about marketing and selling?
You know, what's funny is that I thought that just building a website and uploading my product was enough. I was like, oh, online sales, especially during COVID, when you hear about all these clothing stores going out of business because people are going online. So I thought, jackpot, here I am, buy my clothes. And what I quickly realized was that it's not online, at least when you start. What I found is that the people who shop on my website are repeat customers. So what I started doing was, okay, I need to get out there, meet people. I need to tell my story. I need people to try on my clothes. I need to see if they like it, how it fits, what feedback they have. So even though I've launched it, I think about it as my experiment phase. It's still research. Like, I'm still out there collecting research. So what I did was I partnered with boutiques. So to launch my collection, I partnered with a jewelry brand. So I selected almost a store that wasn't a direct competitor that would, benefit from me bringing in my audience, which at this point was my friends and family, and bringing new traffic to her, right, to buy her jewelry. But for me, it was also great because I was able to have a space in a beautiful, gorgeous store on Michigan Avenue in Chicago, have a space to really set up, show my clothes, and then also she has a following of customers. So it was a win-win for both of us because we're leveraging each other's basically audience base. And so I ended up doing pop-ups, and the first pop-up was awesome because I was able to learn so much from the women trying on the clothes. I realized that the size I thought was going to be the most popular wasn't in fact the most popular. I realized that women gravitated towards a certain color, that they gravitated towards a certain fabric, that they didn't like specific designs because it didn't fit their body well, or they were too shy to show some skin. So that's how I was able to do it. And so at the same time, as people walked into the pop-up, I had little goodie bags. So anyone who walked in, you would get like a free gift. There was an insert in there with more information about the brand, my story, my mission. But then anyone also who walked in, I asked them to drop their name and email in this bowl. And then I would send them a gift card via email. So that's how I started building my email list, was getting these emails. But I would think it was even more powerful because I had met these people in person. So when I was starting to have these pop-ups, I was also simultaneously building my email list. And then I was able to market those people via email as well. So even if they didn't buy anything, if they just stopped in, I just said, hey, drop your name and email. I'll send you a free gift card, right? Pretty simple. Who doesn't want a free gift card? So that's how I did it. And one pop-up after another, that's how I started growing the brand and started making actual sales. But I will say the website component is still there. I would say that it's much harder to acquire customers, especially if you're like a small unknown brand. And my price points are pretty high. So for a dress, you'll probably pay anywhere from $300 to $500, which is, premium pricing. So when people go on these websites and they see these premium prices, they want to try on the clothes and they can't do that online. So they're less likely to buy online. So my customers who buy online are repeat customers, people that have already bought from me, who know the brand, who know me. Then they're more likely to buy online. But that's how I brought it to market. just making that human connection, collaborating with other business owners, selecting strategic partnerships where you're not necessarily direct competitors, but you benefit from each other's audience. And I think there's something powerful to be said about meeting someone in person and hearing their story versus reading it online. So that's really how it started.
And you know what? That's really smart. One of the things you said was that, you know what you essentially did was that you built up your customer base offline, and the website was basically a checkout point.
Yes,
They were just
absolutely.
buying an online, just completing the transaction. But everything else, the trust factor, as you said, especially with garments, it's about fit and the look and so many different things. You did that offline, so which is excellent. And another thing you mentioned, which is also a good tip for anyone, is to the goodie bag component. How do you build up an email list? So the thing is that it's not just sending out random emails, but there is an experience attached to that because they got a gift card out of it. So
Yes.
even if they receive an email few months down the road, they're still going to remember how this got started, right? So
Yeah.
that's really really smart, and that's an excellent tip for anyone who's watching, right? So
Another tip that I forgot to mention,
yeah.
one thing that I did, because
Mhm.
it's hard getting people to come to your pop up. It's so hard, especially I launched November 2020. Like we were still on in pandemic and people were wearing masks and they didn't want to go and go to places. So one little trick that I did was I reached out to a wine company social and I was like, hey, I'm trying to throw this pop up. It's mostly women. Would you want to donate some product to get people to taste your product? So she said, yes. So I got wine donated to the event. So when I marketed it on Instagram, on Facebook, on my social media, I told people there's going to be free wine. People love free drinks. So I would say that that was also great because people came for the wine, they stayed for the clothes. So that's another tip. See if you can get some sort of refreshment, some sort of little bites to get people to incentivize them to stop by.
Yeah, and you know what? I've seen that so many times with anything to do with drinks, whether it's energy drinks, whether it's a
Right.
soda, as you said, wine, etc. So there's so many different components to it, and depending on the audience, you can really leverage each other's products, right? So again, an excellent tip. Thank you so much for that. That's perfect. So I know that we've talked about some of the challenges, how you may have, saved a lot of money initially and all those things. But as the business is going well, I understand that it's profitable today, correct?
Correct. So I attribute that to reading a book, Profit First by Mike McCallowitz. If you're a business owner of any kind, I 1000% recommend reading this book because it gives you step by step instructions on how to set up your bank accounts, your business bank accounts, and automate sales as they come in so that, for example, I sell clothes. And so there's a sales tax in Chicago. And before this, when I first launched, I just had one bank account. All the sales were coming in there. I wasn't separating the sales tax, which isn't my money. That's the government's money. I have to pay that out when I, when I process my taxes. So then there's also the product costs in there that, that I need to repay myself back for the cost of the product. Then there's, my labor. And then there's the profit all bundled up in this one account. But when I first started, I would see the sales come in and I would say, I have X amount of dollars. Yay, I have X amount of dollars. I can spend this. But in reality, no, you have so many things in there that need to be really separated for you to see the profit. So I read this book, Profit First, and he writes down step by step. The key is to creating separate bank accounts. As soon as a sale comes in, my sales tax are moved to a separate bank account. And that bank account is called sales tax. And I don't touch that sales tax. And then after that, then it's called profit first. You take a profit, you take a percentage of all your sales, whether it's 5%, you move that to the profit bank account. After that, you kind of make up these separate bank accounts. Then there's owner's compensation, right? That's what you pay yourself. And that could be 20%. And then there's the kind of business expenses, right? Maybe that includes product costs, that includes your website, that includes maybe rent if you have that. 40% there. And then you have savings. These are things you want to save for in your business. Like, let's say you want to buy a new POS software, you want to buy a new computer, or you want to buy like new furniture for your office, whatever it is, then you have a savings account. So really breaking down your sales component, creating separate bank accounts, and really assigning them a percentage to all equal 100. That's how I became profitable, because immediately after sales tax are removed, I have 5% for profit. And so you're forced to only spend what you have in your business expenses bank account, right? And that's my only bank account that I have a card for. So whenever I go shopping for fabric, whenever I go shopping or pay my pattern makers, I know I look at my business expenses bank account. I can only spend that because I don't have anything else. So if you follow that system and if you stay within your bounds, then you're profitable. And so I recommend 1000% anyone and everyone to read this book. It is life-changing. It is a way to really look at your business in a different lens, to understand what you actually have, because if you bring in $6,000 in sales in a day, you don't have $6,000. 10% of that is sales tax, 20% you have to pay yourself, 30%, it's rent. So I think the key to really becoming profitable is separate bank accounts, visibility within those bank accounts, and staying within your bounds.
Very well said. Yeah. And you know what? Take the recommendation, read the book,
Read the book.
and become profitable. Perfect. Jocelyn, your business is mission focused. I'm really excited for you to tell us about your mission and where do you see see the business going in the future?
Yeah. So goes hand in hand with what I'm going through right now with my brand, as I'm going through a rebrand. So the mission is to empower women to follow their dreams and to uplift women from poverty. It's kind of twofold. I think the first part of it is inspire women to follow their dreams, because I think that was my hurdle, was following my dream of being a fashion designer, because you have this idea that if you're in a creative realm that you're not going to make money. And so you put your dreams and your passions on the back burner. So I want to empower women through the brand to say, like, me having this clothing line is a testament that dreams do come true. And then also uplifting women from poverty. So with the brand, I know that I'm able to make a difference. I've experienced and I've seen a lot of the garment workers, and they're immigrant women who are exploited and not paid a fair wage, not even paid a livable wage. They get exploited by these big factories, and even small and medium-sized clothing designers, they pay them pennies. And it's really unfair, because the garment workers don't have the bargaining power to be like, you know what, I deserve more, I deserve a better pay, because oftentimes they don't know the language. Their culture, the culture that they are assimilated in, they don't believe in speaking up, right? Don't ruffle any feathers. And third, oftentimes a lot of them are undocumented. So they don't have the ability to say, hey, I deserve better, because the boss could just be like, you deserve better, then you can leave. Someone else will take your spot and will pay them just as much. So for me, seeing that, I also saw a part of my ancestors or my family who still lives in Guatemala, who live in poverty, who are garment workers, who get paid pennies. And so for me, it's about, like, I don't want to be another brand that continues a cycle of exploitation of garment workers, especially immigrant women and like people who are my family, my ancestors. Why would I do that? So I knew that when I started this brand, I wanted to create fair paying jobs for women. So all clothes are made by women in Chicago currently, who are paid a fair wage. I pay them up to 4 times the minimum wage, up to $60 an hour for sewing. And I'm very proud of that, because for me, I want to create a workforce where women are actually paid their worth and empowered to be financially independent. So the prices of that, sure, it translates into higher prices for clothing. But I think that when you buy from me, you're buying into that mission. You're supporting a fair workforce and a fair pay. And when you buy from other brands, fast fashion brands, you're doing quite the opposite. You're supporting exploitation. So, it's mission forward in that sense, where everything's made by women who are paid a fair wage. So, what I'm going through right now, what's next for the brand is I'm going through a rebrand. So it first started off as a clothing rental company, and the name was Swap and Strut. So you swap clothes as a clothing rental, and you strut down the street, whatever. So, but because I launched during the pandemic, I quickly realized that people weren't renting clothes. People were asking to buy them. They weren't events to go to. People weren't renting. So I quickly changed the model to just a sell model. And, over the years now, as I've gotten closer to my mission, more aligned with the values of the brand, I realized that I needed to go through a rebrand. I just felt that I needed to get closer to my roots. So I actually just came back from Guatemala to look for a manufacturing company to produce the clothes in Guatemala, but to also buy fabric from indigenous women, indigenous weavers who create these beautiful fabrics who still live in poverty in Guatemala. So, I'm kind of exploring other ways to incorporate women to pay them a fair wage in Guatemala and make a greater impact for women living in Guatemala. So I'm going through a bigger rebrand, and the way the clothes will be made will be different. And the materials, I'm going to try to stop, using like materials from France, fabric from France, fabric from England, and just actually buy it locally from third world countries, from women who could use support.
That is awesome. That is awesome. I really like the things that you said. And the part that I liked the most was to say that, you know what, I pay 4 times than minimum wage, yet I'm profitable. The organization is mission forward. This is awesome, Jocelyn. Yes, this is
Thank
awesome.
you.
So, if people wanted to find you, where would they look?
Yeah, so you can find me on Swap and Strut. So it's my Instagram. That's probably the best way to find me. And I also started a podcast called Quit Your Job and Get Creative, where I explore the stories of women who have quit their jobs. And my Instagram for that is Quit Your Job and Get Creative, or you can find it on Apple Podcasts as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, Jocelyn. I really appreciate that. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, Tariq. Have a great day.